There is no specific code requirement in the National Electrical Code, that is NEC, that requires abandoned power feed conductors to be removed or tagged. However, there are general requirements for electrical safety and the installation of new equipment. An inspector's interpretation of the code may have been based on a local ordinance or their own interpretation of general safety concerns. In general, it is good practice to remove abandoned electrical conductors or disconnect them and tag them as such. Consider the following regarding safety. Abandoned conductors can potentially present a safety hazard, especially if they are energized or accidentally contacted. Consider future renovations. Leaving abandoned conductors in place can make it more difficult to perform future renovations or electrical work. Consider code compliance. While there is no specific requirement for removing abandoned power feeds, it may be considered a violation of the NEC general safety provisions. Recommendations include disconnecting and tagging. If you do not remove the abandoned feed, it is recommended to disconnect the conductors at the source and tag them clearly as abandoned or do not energize. Consult with a licensed electrician. If you are unsure about how to safely disconnect or remove abandoned power feed conductors, consult with a licensed electrician. Regarding permit requirements, in most jurisdictions a permit is not required to disconnect an abandoned power feed. However, it is always advisable to check with your local building department for specific requirements. The NEC does have requirements for abandoned low-voltage conductors, for example, communication cables and telephone lines, which must be removed or capped off. An inspector may have been referring to the 2005 NEC, which introduced new requirements for electrical installations in unfinished statics and crawl spaces, but these requirements do not specifically address abandoned power feeds. Disconnecting and making safe an abandoned electrical feed involves several important steps to ensure safety and prevent future hazards. Here's a detailed guide on how to do it properly. Firstly, identify the circuit. Before starting any work, positively identify the circuit you are about to disconnect. Use a circuit tracer or a multimeter to confirm that you have located the correct breaker or fuse that feeds the abandoned conductors. Secondly, de-energize the circuit. Once you've identified the circuit, turn off the corresponding breaker or remove the fuse at the main electrical panel. After de-energizing the circuit, verify that the conductors are indeed de-energized. Use a non-contact voltage tester or multimeter to check for any voltage present on the wires. Place one lead of the multimeter on the conductor and the other on a known ground. If the meter reads 0 volts, it's safe to proceed. Thirdly, disconnect the conductors at the source. At the point where the abandoned conductors originate, such as a junction box or the main electrical panel, carefully disconnect them. Use insulated tools to avoid any accidental contact with live parts. If the conductors are connected to a breaker, remove the wires from the breaker terminals. If they are spliced in a junction box, disconnect the splices. Fourthly, cap off the wires. After disconnecting the conductors, each wire end must be individually capped off with appropriately sized wire connectors or electrical tape. This prevents accidental contact and shorts. Push the capped wire ends back into the junction box or panel, ensuring they are neatly arranged and secured. Use electrical tape to bundle the wires together if necessary, keeping them organized and preventing them from touching each other. Fifthly, tag the abandoned conductors. Clearly label the abandoned conductors to indicate that they are disconnected and should not be re-energized. Use a permanent marker to write "Abandoned, do not energize" on a piece of electrical tape or a pre-printed warning label. Attach the label to the capped-off wires in a visible location. If the conductors run through conduit, label the conduit as well to prevent future confusion. Sixthly, remove accessible wiring. If the abandoned conductors are easily accessible and pose a potential hazard, consider removing them entirely. This is especially important in areas where they could be accidentally contacted or damaged. Carefully pull the wires out of the conduit or remove them from their routing. If the wires are stapled or secured in place, use appropriate tools to remove the fasteners without damaging surrounding structures. Seventhly, seal the conduit. If the abandoned conductors were run through a conduit, Seal the ends of the conduit to prevent moisture, dust, and debris from entering. Use duct seal, electrical tape, or conduit caps to effectively seal the openings. This helps protect the remaining wiring and prevents the conduit from becoming a pathway for pests or water. Eighthly, document the changes. Keep a record of the work you've performed, including a date, a description of the abandoned circuit, and any relevant details. Update your electrical panel directory to reflect the changes, clearly indicating that the circuit has been disconnected and abandoned. Store this information in a safe place for future reference. Consider creating a simple diagram or sketch showing the location of the abandoned conductors and the points where they were disconnected. Ninthly, inspect the work. After completing the disconnection and tagging, thoroughly inspect your work to ensure that everything is safe and secure. Double-check that all wire ends are properly capped off and labeled. Verify that the conduit is sealed and that the remaining wiring is neatly organized. Use a flashlight to inspect hard-to-reach areas and confirm that there are no exposed wires or potential hazards. Tenthly, call a professional. If you are uncomfortable performing any of these steps or if you encounter any unexpected issues, do not hesitate to consult with a licensed electrician. Working with electricity can be dangerous, and it's always best to err on the side of caution. A qualified electrician can safely disconnect and remove abandoned electrical feeds, ensuring that the work is done in accordance with local codes and regulations. If you're dealing with an underground feed, additional considerations apply. Underground wiring can be more complex to disconnect and remove due to its location and potential hazards. Firstly, locate the underground wiring. Use utility maps, cable locators, or other appropriate methods to accurately locate the underground wiring. Contact your local utility company to request assistance in identifying and marking the location of buried cables. Avoid digging or excavating in areas where underground utilities are present to prevent damage and injury. Secondly, disconnect at the source. Disconnect the underground wiring at its source, typically a junction box or the main electrical panel. Follow the same steps as for above-ground wiring, ensuring that the circuit is de-energized and that all conductors are properly capped off and labeled. Take extra care to protect the exposed wire ends from moisture and corrosion. Thirdly, remove the underground wiring. If possible, remove the underground wiring entirely to eliminate any future hazards. This may involve digging a trench to access the buried cables and pulling them out of the ground. Use appropriate tools and equipment to safely remove the wiring, avoiding any damage to surrounding structures or utilities. Fourthly, backfill the trench. After removing the underground wiring, backfill the trench with soil and compact it thoroughly. Restore the surface to its original condition, ensuring that it is level and stable. If necessary, reseed the area or replace any damaged landscaping. Fifthly, abandon in place. If it's not possible to remove the underground wiring, it can be abandoned in place, but only if it is made safe and poses no future hazards. Cut the wires at both ends and cap them off securely. Fill the conduit of trench with concrete or other suitable material to prevent any future use or access. Clearly mark the location of the abandoned underground wiring on your property map or utility records. Regarding permits and inspections, disconnecting or removing an electrical feed may require permits and inspections depending on local regulations. Check with your local building department to determine the specific requirements in your area. Firstly, check local requirements. Contact your local building department or electrical inspector to inquire about permit requirements for disconnecting or removing electrical wiring. Provide them with details about the project, including the location of the wiring, the type of circuit, and the scope of the work. Ask about any specific codes or regulations that apply to abandoned wiring. Secondly, obtain necessary permits. If permits are required, obtain them before starting any work. Complete the permit application form accurately and provide all necessary documentation such as site plans, wiring diagrams, and contractor information. Pay any required fees and schedule an inspection with the building department. Thirdly, schedule an inspection. After completing the work, schedule an inspection with the building department to verify that it meets all applicable codes and regulations. Be prepared to provide access to the work area and answer any questions the inspector may have. Correct any deficiencies identified during the inspection to ensure compliance. Finally, documentation. Keep copies of all permits, inspection reports, and other relevant documents for your records. This documentation may be required for future property transactions or renovations. Store the documents in a safe place where they can be easily accessed when needed. Consider scanning the documents and storing them electronically for added security. Several key safety precautions must be adhered to when disconnecting or removing electrical wiring to prevent electrical shock, fire, and other hazards. Firstly, always de-energize. Always de-energize the circuit before working on any electrical wiring. Turn off the corresponding breaker or remove the fuse at the main electrical panel. Verify that the circuit is de-energized using a non-contact voltage tester or multimeter. Secondly, use insulated tools. Use insulated tools with rubber grips to prevent electrical shock. Check that the tools are in good condition and free from any damage. Replace any tools that are worn or damaged. Thirdly, wear personal protective equipment. Wear appropriate personal protective equipment, including safety glasses, rubber gloves, and work boots. Avoid wearing loose clothing or jewelry that could get caught on electrical wiring. Fourthly, work in a dry area. Work in a dry area to prevent electrical shock. Avoid working in damp or wet conditions. If necessary, use a ground fault circuit interrupter, that is, GFCI outlet to protect against electrical shock. Fifthly, avoid distractions. Avoid distractions while working on electrical wiring. Turn off cell phones and other electronic devices. Focus your attention on the task at hand and avoid rushing. Sixthly, know your limits. Know your limits and do not attempt any electrical work that you are not qualified to perform. Consult with a licensed electrician if you are unsure about any aspect of the work. Seventhly, follow codes and regulations. Follow all applicable codes and regulations when disconnecting or removing electrical wiring. Check with your local building department to ensure that you are in compliance. Eighthly, inspect your work. After completing the work, inspect your work thoroughly to ensure that everything is safe and secure. Double-check that all wire ends are properly capped off and labeled. Verify that the conduit is sealed and that the remaining wiring is neatly organized. Grounding is a critical aspect of electrical safety, and proper grounding practices must be followed when disconnecting or removing electrical wiring. Firstly, maintain ground connections. Maintain ground connections when disconnecting or removing electrical wiring. Do not remove or disconnect any grounding wires or components. Ensure that all grounding connections are properly made and tightened. Secondly, test ground continuity. Test ground continuity to ensure that the grounding system is functioning properly. Use a multimeter to measure the resistance between the grounding conductor and other grounded metal parts. The resistance should be very low, typically less than 1 ohm. Thirdly, replace damaged components. Replace any damaged grounding components such as ground rods, grounding conductors, or grounding clamps. Use only approved grounding components that are listed by a recognized testing laboratory. Fourthly, bond metal parts. Bond all metal parts together to create a continuous grounding path. Use bonding jumpers to connect metal enclosures, metal conduits, and metal equipment. Ensure that all bonding connections are properly made and tightened. Fifthly, protect ground wires. Protect ground wires from damage. Avoid running ground wires through areas where they could be easily damaged or cut. Use conduit or other protective measures to protect ground wires from physical damage.